Hello. This is a lesson that was recorded last Sunday on the 12th. And because we had some issues, I am re-recording it. Here is our splash screen, which tells you that we are using this for nonprofit. It gives the permissions from the scriptures and from the definitions from Online Bible and also my copyright. The reason that I'm re-recording this is because our live stream was a train wreck the last 2 weeks. And so I'm re-recording it because especially this one from the 12th was absolutely unusable. Our passage today is 1 Samuel chapter 21, verses 1 through 15. If you like the video, please click like. Please consider commenting on it, because if the videos are liked and commented upon, it will give them a higher listing in YouTube, and perhaps some other people may see them. Click on subscribe and you will be notified when we update with new videos. And please consider donating online at cheshire-church.com if you are a remote learner in these passages. So today, our title is David the Fugitive. Those of you who are old, like I am, probably remember the movie The Fugitive, where Dr. Richard Kimball was wrongly convicted. We know from the beginning of the series that Dr. Richard Kimball did not kill his wife, but he was convicted of it and sentenced to death. Somehow he escaped. I forgot how he escaped, but throughout the series, the police are chasing him, and he's doing everything he can to find out who really killed his wife. And so this movie has a similar theme to the passage that we have today that we're looking at, because David, we know from the beginning that David is innocent of anything, and he is being persecuted and chased by Saul simply because Saul knows in his heart that David will be the next king, and that Jonathan, his son, will not be the next king. So I want to talk to you a little bit by way of introduction. Those of you who have been following this series learned early on in the series that Samuel, the prophet Samuel here, was an adopted son of Eli the high priest. And Eli was a very fat guy, and his sons Hophni and Phinehas were not good people. They had sexual relations with the women that came to the tabernacle to worship, and God was, had enough of it, and he warned Eli that judgment was about to fall upon his family. And so there was a war, and Phinehas and Hophni had the idea that they would take the Ark of the Covenant of God, the holiest thing in ancient Judaism, and that they would take it into battle, because God was the one who was seated on the throne of the Ark of the Covenant. And so the Ark of the Covenant would guarantee their victory. But what they didn't realize is that because the judgment of God was upon them, the Philistines won the battle. Hophni and Phinehas were both killed in the battle. The Ark of the Covenant was taken by the Philistines and taken to their idol's temple, Dagon, and placed before the idol as a victory, as a spoils of war. And when news got back to Eli that his two sons were dead and that the Ark of the Covenant had been taken, he fell over in his chair and his neck was broken because he was such a large individual, rather rotund. So Phineas was dead, and Phineas's wife was 9 months pregnant. And when she heard that her husband was dead, she gave birth to a son named Ichabod, which means the glory of God has departed. So also in the family, there was a son named Ahitub. And Ahitub was the father of Ahijah and Ahimelech. So these two, we see that we're a couple of generations in now in the book of Samuel. Time has elapsed, and Samuel is extremely old, or maybe even gone at this point. And the two priests who are descended from Phineas are these two brothers are in the scene, and then another child of Ahimelech is also mentioned in these passages, these verses, Abiathar. And Ahijah was the high priest, and Ahimelech was like number two, and they ministered in different places. Ahijah actually was the chaplain for Saul. We see him presenting offerings for Saul and saying prayers for Saul and so forth. And we're going to be introduced in this passage to his brother Ahimelech. So I just want to do that as a little background. So David came to Nob. It's not Nob. We would pronounce it Nob, just like we would pronounce the book of Job, but it's Nob, to the priest Ahimelech. And his name means my brother is the ruler. So he's second born, and when he's born, his parents give him the name, my brother's in charge here. And so David, as he escapes from Saul, and he comes to this shrine where the priest is, and Ahimelech sees him coming alone, and he knows something's wrong, because David is, he's coming in and out with the army, and here David is fleeing. He has no weapons with him. And so Ahimelech begins to tremble, and he knows something's wrong here. And so he asks, why are you alone? And why is no one with you? Two very good questions. He's a little bit suspicious. So what does David do? What he does so well, he tells a lie. Now, also in background, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Levitical cities. There were 12 tribes of Israel. There are 12 sons of Israel. And yet, Levi, which was the priestly tribe, did not receive a land inheritance in Israel. The Levites were given cities in 48 locations among all the other tribes. And so the 12th tribe, because Levi was missing in the inheritance, the 12th tribe was divided between Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so it counted as 12. You recall back in the blessing in Genesis, I think chapter 49 or 50, Israel blesses Joseph's sons and gives them a full share of the inheritance. So when the land was divided up, the priest went to 48 locations, and so that made sure that in the pre-temple days that there were teaching priests available to everybody, within a respectable distance. And among these 48 locations, 6 were cities of refuge. And if somebody was accused of a crime, they could run to the city of refuge, and they could be protected until their court date. And so this priestly city in Benjamin, which is the tribe which Saul came from, it's not too far away from the narrative that we've looked at in recent weeks. It's not too far from Jerusalem, which was not part of Israel yet in those days, had not been conquered yet, and the Jebusites were still living there. So it's a little bit north of what modern day Jerusalem, which at that time was called Jebuus. So David, in answering the priest, why are you alone? He tells this lie. The king has charged me with a matter. And he said to me, no one must know anything of the matter about which I send you and with which I've charged you. In other words, don't ask me any questions. Lie 2. I've made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. Do lies ever come back to haunt people? What do? We tell kids, if you lie, your nose will grow. The Pinocchio story. So parents tell their kids a lie to teach them not to lie. So David asks, what have you at hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever's here. He probably has a couple people with him. There might be a bodyguard. It almost seems like there are a couple people there. He's not absolutely alone, but he's pretty much alone. Sometimes you see people with a couple bodyguards. One time I ran into Little Richard in the airport in Cincinnati, and he had 2 gorillas with him, great big huge guys for bodyguards. And, perhaps David had a couple people with him. Now David knew that there would be bread there, and so he says, I need some food. Well, if people ask for food, we're, as Christians, we're pretty inclined to give it to them, as we should. And so the priest says this, I have no ordinary bread, only holy bread, provided that the young men have kept themselves from women. Now, this is, I don't know what you think about holy bread, but I can remember as a child going to St. Bridget's Church over in Bloomfield. It was always open because nobody did anything to churches in those days. And you could go in, and there were candles in the front where people would come in and make an offering and light a candle in remembrance of, their father, mother, child, whatever, to keep the light going to God, and, to let God know that they're praying for the souls of the departed and so forth. And as you came into St. Bridget's, and I assume this is true with any Roman Catholic church, there's holy water before you sit down, and the people will come in and dip their hand in it and genuflect and, say their initial prayer. And one day, the priest, Father McNamara, was in there, and I said to him, what's up with this water? And he said, it's holy water. And I said, well, where do you get it? And he said, from the tap. And I said, well, how is it holy water then? He said, well, because I prayed over it. And similar, I think, in this holy bread, there had to be holy bread in the house of God, and it was put out every week. And at the end of the week, they put fresh bread out, and the priest could eat the bread that was left over. So it was pretty stale probably by that time. Although no bread was probably very good, because we didn't start to get good bread until Fleischmann invented the the instant yeast to make the bread rise. So here we go back, a long time. I mean, if I said the year 1000 was the year 1000 a long time ago, everybody would say, yeah, it was an awful long time ago. And so I say, double it, you go back to the time of Jesus, and triple it, you go back to the time of David, and then maybe quadruple it or almost quadruple it. We don't really know what the date of Moses is, Moses and Aaron, the beginning of the people of Israel. But in the beginning, when Aaron, who was the first priest, he was told, Aaron and his son shall eat the bread in the basket at the entrance of the tent of meeting. They themselves shall eat the food by which the atonement is made to ordain and consecrate, but no one else shall eat of them because they're holy. So David comes in and asks for bread. He said, the priest Ahimelech says, I don't have any regular bread. I've got holy bread. But he doesn't say you can't eat it, even though you couldn't. I mean, there are rules against it. And so Ahimelech says, okay, this guy is hungry. And so I have to do something about that. And he says, as long as the young men haven't been with women. And David says, oh, no, nobody's been with their wife, or we're clean. Indeed, the women have been kept from us, as always, when I go on an expedition. Now, previously, he tells him that, it doesn't matter when I do one of these videos, that clock always rings. So I believe it's 11 o'clock. So in the previous lie, David says, oh yeah, I made haste. I had to get out of here quick. It's a secret thing. And now he says that the young men, they've been totally prepared, and they've been away from women, and we're all set. These guys are holy. When it's a common journey, they stay away from the wives. How much more so with this very special? They're totally clean and they're totally prepared. Well, okay. David was far from perfect. So the priest gave him the holy bread. There was no bread there except the bread of the presence. So it was symbolic of, the people of God, and God is present with them. And from other passages, we understand there were 12 loaves, one for each tribe of Israel. And so for, the weekly bread or the daily bread of the priest, he gives away 5/12, which probably means he's going to be hungry this week. Uh-oh. Now a certain man of Saul's servants was there, detained before the Lord. Not sure what that means. Maybe he was at an extended prayer meeting, or he was having a encounter. Maybe he was doing a little retreat there. He's before the Lord. He's not a Jew. He's an Edomite. You will remember that the Edomites are the descendants of Esau, Jacob's brother. And so these people are related, but we're many, many generations out. His name is Doeg, and his job is he's the chief of Saul's shepherds. At this point, we don't know any more about this guy. His name means fearing, and one person has written a book that says exposing the Doeg spirit, a guy named Eric Lynch. We'll see a little more about this guy next week. David said to Ahimelech, I have no spear or sword. Have you no spear or sword here with you? I did not bring my sword or my weapons with me because the king's business required haste. Here we have lie number 3. Now we'll see that when David asks about the sword, he knows that there's a sword there. And so he asks for it. The sword of Goliath, who he killed, is there, and he knows it's there because he left it there, or he assumes it's there because he left it there. The priest said, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. So it's concealed. Nobody can see it. It's behind the ephod. It's behind, it's in the closet behind the priest robe. If you'll take it, take it. There's none here except that one. David said, there's none like it. Give it to me. So at this point, Ahimelech becomes unarmed, and David becomes armed. Could this be a problem? So David runs away incognito. We're mentioning in the service where this sermon was presented that Alice Cooper, some of you may know who Alice Cooper is. I saw him a couple of years ago. He's a Christian guy, but he does some outlandish theater and music. And in his song way back in the day, in the early 70s, he did the song No More Mr. Nice Guy, where he had this reputation as being the kind of guy that ruins the youth of America. And one of the lyrics in his song says, I went to church incognito. You see pictures of these Hollywood stars who, they put a big hat on, or they put a scarf on their head, or big sunglasses and, ordinary clothes. They try to make themselves look like they don't look so that they can go out in public. And so David flees away from the priest, which isn't really too many miles away from where Saul is, and he heads out. And where does he go? He goes to Gath, one of the main cities of the Philistines, and in fact, the city that Goliath came from. So he runs to escape the king Saul of Israel. He runs to the enemies of Israel and begins to hide out in the city that's ruled by this guy named Achish, which means I'll blacken you. One time I was preaching in India, and my translator had a problem because I said he was beaten black and blue. I forgot what I was talking about, but the translator looks at me, goes, black and blue? What does that mean? And I said, bruised, all bruised up. Their skin is darker, and bruising is not as apparent on their skin as it is on ours. So he didn't understand the term black and blue. Well, this guy's name actually means I'll blacken you, or I'll terrify you, or it could possibly mean, based on the language, it could possibly mean only a man. So I think any of those might relate to Achish. He's the king of Gath, where Goliath came from, where the giant came from. And David escapes there because he thinks that nobody will know who he is there. And he also thinks that Saul will never look for him there, or maybe wouldn't dare look for him there. Of course, the phone is ringing. And the servants of Achish said to him, is not David the king of the land? See, they don't even, these are, pre-cell phone days, and they've seen David fighting battles and coming against them, and say, this guy looks like David the king. They weren't looking at David prophetically as the king that was coming. They thought he was already the king because of all the battles that he had won against them. Did they not sing to one another? Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s, which you'll recall was the first thing that ticked Saul off, because David was given the accolades as being the great warrior more so than Saul. And so all of a sudden, David hears the words of these people and he becomes afraid. And he decides, hey, I got to do something or I'm going to be found out. If the king really understands who I am, it's going to be curtains. And so I've gone from the frying pan into the fire here. So he changed his behavior before them and he pretended to be mad when in their presence, and he scratched on the doors and he let spit run down on his beard. Did you ever see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? It's an early 70s movie, very disturbing movie too. McMurphy and Chief are both in the nut house, and McMurphy is in the nut house because he pretends to be insane when charged with a crime. He doesn't want to go to jail, and so he decides to pretend to be insane, and they look at him. He's not really insane, but he's avoiding jail, and he goes into the nut house, and very bad things happen to him. And eventually in the movie, you find out that Chief is also not crazy, but they're both pretending to be crazy. And it's an interesting movie. The other characters, Christopher Lloyd is in it, and Danny DeVito is in it, and then the famous Nurse Ratched. If you ever heard people say, well, she's Nurse Ratched, it's about this movie, an evil nurse. And so these guys are pretending to be insane to avoid the consequences of what they've done. So David pretends to be insane in Philistine, and so Achish says, "This guy's crazy. Why have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen? Shall this guy come into my house?" And the house being not the individual house where he lives, and not the castle in which he rules from, but his domain. Now, it's an interesting story, and what makes it even more interesting is this is the only passage from Samuel that Jesus ever mentioned. I know mention should not be capitalized. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples became hungry, and he began to pick the heads of grain and eat. Now, is it technically wrong? No. There was a law that said you shall not harvest on the Sabbath day. But the Pharisees were saying that rubbing heads of grain, I don't know. I asked a congregation on Sunday if they had ever been in a wheat field and had done that, and I have, and most of the people in the congregation had not done that. But you get the grain, and there's 50 or 60 grains of wheat on it, and you have to break it out of the chaff and have a little snack of wheat, which they did, and the disciples said that's harvesting, and that's wrong. You can't do that. Depending on which gospel you look at, he said to them, "Have you not read what David did?" Mark records it this way, and he says to them, see that asterisk on said? Mark is almost completely in the present tense. It's not he said, he says. It's all in the straight away. We do this, we do that. He says this, he said that. And so in English it's translated said in the past tense, but it's in the present tense in the gospel. Have you never read what David did? Matthew says, have you not read? Mark says, have you never read? And Luke puts it this way: Jesus answering them said, have you not even read? what David did. And it's interesting that Jesus doesn't talk about any of the historical narrative of the passage except the fact that somebody is hungry and needs to eat. When the Pharisees saw this, they said, "Look, your disciples do what's not lawful. Have you not read what David and his companions did when they were hungry, how he entered the house of God and they ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for him to eat, nor for those with him, but for the priests alone? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple break the Sabbath and are innocent? But I say to you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire compassion and not a sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent." And so it's kind of surprising to me as a Bible teacher to, when you look at these passages and try to make them relevant in the 21st century. Jesus looked at this passage and he completely ignored the circumstances except for the fact that somebody needed to eat. And his disciples, when it says they became hungry, it's probably not because they missed brunch. It's probably because days had passed since they had eaten and they're on their way to synagogue and they grab a little snack on the way in. So there we have it. Next week, we'll see. We're going to try to get the sermon as is presented on Sunday along with the PowerPoint. If we don't do that, if we can't get the bugs worked out of it, we'll do it again like this next week. So may God bless. Please, if you like this video, make a comment, like it, and that will help promote it on the YouTube. So may God bless, and we'll catch you next time.